Hello, hello, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I am Giddy. Today we have Kira from Paradigm, and I'm so excited. Hi, Kira. Thank you for being here.
Hi. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, yes. For those that don't know you yet, could you give us a little intro on yourself?
Yeah, well, gosh, there's where do I begin? No, I'm just kidding. Well, I think I'm here today primarily as an entrepreneur, as an HR slash people operations consultant. So we help creative business owners and agency owners build really powerful, dynamic, and creative teams while still meeting HR compliance regulations. And we really specialize in trying to change the way that people view HR, in that it's the bad guy until you need it and then you need it the most. But
Mm.
our big mission is really to create a new way of working. So it's a response to the anti-work movement that got really, really big during COVID, and just trying to create some structure within the systems that provide stability and expectation for your team without having them sacrifice creativity. And we do that by zoning in on the business owner and creating company cultures around what you really want to do and what you want to create. And the way that we do that is essentially, or the reason that we do it that way is because we want more women and marginalized communities to own businesses that stand the test of time. And the only way we can do that is by not fitting into a box. So we've made HR a little bit more accessible that way.
I love that. That is amazing and very up my alley. And I know everyone in my audience. I'm going to go ahead and get the biggest question out of the way now before everyone is like, how does HR apply to like all businesses? Because I can already hear the people that are like smaller or maybe they like haven't expanded their team yet being like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. How does
Mhm.
it apply to them? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's twofold. We have good news and bad news. Which one do you want first?
Ooh, let's get bad news out of the way. I'm a bad news
Okay.
out of the way girly.
Okay, good. So that's my favorite way to go too, because it's a little easier to transition out of it. But the unfortunate news that you're not going to want to hear is that no matter what type of business you have, whether you have contractors or employees, or you have 100 people, you make $25 a year, you make $30 million a year, the same laws apply to you as Amazon or as the business owner next door or as the MLM chick down the street, or all those different things. When it comes to laws and regulations and how we treat our workers, those are put in place to help create less abusive environments. And so it's not something we want to turn away from. It's something that we want to embrace, is that responsibility for creating a safe place for people to work. So the bad news is it applies to you. The good news is it applies to you because you get to use it to help you grow and expand. The good news about HR is it really touches every part of your business. So from your offer design to your profitability, to your growth planning, to your finances, to your creative, to your company culture, to how you show up for your audience and the message that you want to put out there, that's all based on the magic of the people that work with you. So there is so much possibility to have a teeny tiny team that makes a big impact, or a huge team that makes a big impact, or a tiny team that makes just enough impact to help you live your life. And the way that you get to be in charge of that is by using HR practices, principles, research, and support. It really puts you in the driver's seat and lets you be more proactive when it comes to designing the business that you want to run, and also to help put women in leadership positions, getting a seat at the table, and usually making more money in the process.
Love that. And like okay, do you watch The Office?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
When like Oscar is trying to describe the surplus and Michael is like, explain it to me like I'm 10 years old. Like, explain the
Mhm.
surplus to me like I'm 10 years old. Can you give us a 10-year-old understanding of how HR kind of manifests in really basic layman terms for those of us that are like, let's say, a team of just ourselves right now, or like looking to expand more into like contracting out or assistants or what have you, or bring on associate teams, like a smaller, let's say 1 to 10 team or contractors. Can you explain that to us like we're 10 as to what that would look like?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for not talking to me about Toby, because when you said you watched The Office, I was
You're like,
like,
oh no.
yes. And honestly, Toby was right every time. But no, I think that the best example that I can give is a real life example from one of our clients. So I'm going to use a photography client just because I know who I'm talking to here.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of our photographer clients will come to us without any team members with a big vision, a lot of ideas, a lot of creative energy, and being pulled in 1 million directions. They're like turning into Gumby as we speak.
Mhm.
And when we're helping them to figure out what it is that they want to build, each photographer has a different desire for their business. So HR can help you to take what that desire is for your business to reverse engineer it into the support you need to step into the role that that business needs. So in 1 month, we worked with 3 photographers, and all 3 of them had different goals. One was a high fashion photographer, one was more family and portrait photography, and one was a boudoir photographer that wanted to do education and open a studio. So their first person had very similar titles when we pursued the candidates. They were a marketing and operations assistant or a marketing assistant or a development assistant or some type of coordinator or something like that. But they all did different things in order to create the white space that that CEO, that now they're a CEO, they were a photographer, now they're CEO,
Mhm.
needed in order to step into the role that would allow them to create the business that they wanted. So HR really helps you to take the overall business and the vision that you have for the business and boil it down to the brass tacks and the nitty gritty, and to use that strategy and make it into something that designs you your role of that will take your business to the next level. So we really like to think about HR less about what the people are going to be doing that you're hiring and more about what it is that you want to do in order to get to your goals as a business owner.
So what does that look like in practice? So like let's go with like studio owner, photographer type vibe. What does that look like when they first come to you? Like what are your guys' first steps?
Yeah. So the first thing we're going to ask is, so what role do you see yourself playing in your business, and what are your kind
Mhm.
of big picture overall growth plans? And then we kind of start to dissect what they're doing every day and where their time is going every day and why they keep running out of time every day, or they don't have the time to pursue the things they really want to. And then from there, we start to really boil that down into tasks and operational metrics that are we're going to actually put into a job description that we can then go out and seek out and find a person to fill those tasks. But the difference between a job description that you get online versus one that might be driven towards this boudoir photographer is that we're going to infuse the culture of the company that they want to create in 2, 3, or 5 years into that initial job post. Because a job description and a job post are not the same thing. The job description can be the thing that really catapults how you train and how you measure their performance, how you measure ROI and guarantee that you get a return on that investment of that first hire. Where a job post is really going to draw in candidates that are going to help you build your company culture. So for a creative and for their first hire in particular, whoever you bring in is going to build your culture, whether you take control of it intentionally or you let them take control of it intentionally. So if you want to really retain the goals of your business, your culture has to reflect where you're going. So you have to be able to articulate that to the people that you're bringing in generally before you ever bring them in. And we do that through a really thoughtfully crafted job post. People spend a lot of time focusing on the tasks of a job post or a job description, but what they really should be focusing on is where they want to go and what type of person is going to help them get there, and the roles
Mm.
that they're going to play come with those tasks.
That's such a good point that I've never thought of. How do you suggest that people like how do you identify what you want the culture to be? What does that process look like? Is that something that you guys do?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know how you might create like a brand guide for like
Mhm.
the visual representation of a brand? Just think about the culture of your company as like the roadmap or the internal guts of how you want it to feel while you're working for your company. So, where a brand guide might represent how you want your clients to feel, or how people are going to take your brand and interpret it into what they expect from you, or what kind of service they're going to get, or your kind of footprint on your, I guess, industry, or you'd probably explain that better. I'm clearly not a
Mhm.
graphic
No,
designer or
you're
anything
doing
like
great.
that. Yeah. The culture is going to be really developed through what we would call like a culture guide or a culture code or whatever really works for you. And it's going to be a roadmap of not only behaviors that are going to contribute to the culture that you're choosing, but it's going to give you the words and the space in order to really explain what it means to work for your company. And what we see a lot happening is if you have unsuccessful first hires or fragmented teams, it's because nobody's putting those bumpers up on the bowling alley, and the ball is just kind of flying around in every direction, and everybody wants to do the best they can, and we're trying to move the ball forward, but there's no roadmap for telling us how to get there. So we've been able to kind of dissect, through working with over 75 companies now in the past 3.5 years, how to pull out the biggest and most impactful bits of information from the founders and the people in charge of the company in order to kind of redirect that into very simple and straightforward behaviors. So it could be something as simple as visual things like the emojis that you use with your clients, but it could be something a little bit deeper, like, hey, we're supposed to be an authority on this subject. We're never going to send a link for a client to do their own research. We're going to put it into explain this to me like I'm 5 and help them understand the PTO laws in that state, or whatever the case may be. So everything that you do within your company can almost be run through a culture guide of how you communicate internally with each other as well as externally with your clients. And we do get a lot of support from the visual side of things. And what really, I'm sure when you're sitting down with clients, or I mean, you can probably speak to that, like there are certain questions that you can mine this
Yeah.
information out of. So we get kind of lucky sometimes because they've already gone through the first process with whoever's creating their branding. And then we just dive a little bit deeper. And sometimes we touch on some trauma, like things that they're bringing to their business that they don't want to replicate, work environments they don't want to replicate, leadership they don't want to replicate. And sometimes we have to steer them in a different direction. Like we might be like, hey, I know you think that this is a really flexible process or whatever, but that's actually going to cause a lot of toxicity and unfairness or even discrimination within your team. So from that culture
Interesting.
guide, we take it one step further into the actual policies in an employee handbook.
Wow. I'm like, there's so much stuff that I'm like, Jamie, listening to this editing, we're gonna be making some change. I'm like, we might need a little handbook. No, that's amazing. I think it's also like it's so interesting to hear the complexities of this because I think self-entrepreneurship, self-employment is like the one thing that you're just like, oh, I don't need HR. Like it's just me. And then when you bring on your first hire, you're like, well, it's just me and one other person. And then maybe you bring on someone else and you're like, oh, it's just the three of us. It's literally fine. How do you suggest people like get ahead of this to make sure that whether it is their first hire or their second hire, they're like prepared to make this a very conscious series of decisions within their business?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, if the world was perfect and, everyone that's listening to this is like, yeah, we have a perfect client that comes to us at the perfect time and it works so
Mm-hmm.
smoothly, then we would be your hire that you make after your CPA and your lawyer. So whatever order you do that in, we would be the next person that comes on board. And really excellent HR consultants can communicate with, if you don't have a team, then they can communicate with your lawyer, they can communicate with your accountant, they can communicate with you and create something that's really cohesive and collaborative. But what ends up usually happening is we have teams come in with 1 or 2 people and they've run into some roadblocks or they're not sure how to handle this issue. And then the CEO's like, I have 2 people on my team. How am I always worried about people stuff? Like I should still be in my zone of genius or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when you start to run into those issues where being a leader of your team is kind of you just like ping ponging back and forth and not always knowing the answers and then shooting Google something or putting something into ChatGPT and like hoping for the best.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually when we get people that are coming to work with us to set that foundation. In a perfect world, we do it before you make your first hire or as you're transitioning from contractors to employees, usually because there's become some awareness of laws that you may not be following correctly, utilizing your contractors, things like that. But every other client we have is an agency owner with a few employees, and they're like, I don't even do agency anymore. All I do is
Mm.
people, and I have no idea like what now I have to do maternity leave.
Yeah.
This person threw out discrimination in a meeting. I have a
Mm-hmm.
trans employee. I don't know how to approach this situation. Like
Mm-hmm.
those little things are the things that keep us up at night, and they have almost nothing to do with the law. They just have to do with
Mm-hmm.
wanting to be a good leader. So we span the gamut.
Does this apply to like your relationship with your clients as well, or really just internal?
I think it does. When there's a couple ways that our client work interacts with your HR strategy. One is just if you have someone on your team that is interacting with your clients or leading other members of your team and there is a deadline,
Mm-hmm.
then and there's communication standards and things like that, then they really should be classified as an employee. So one of the ways that client work gets rolled into these conversations is specifically just in classification. And to give you a little bit of background, there was there's always been these classification laws for employees and contractors, but the IRS actually started cracking down on them in 2021 and 2022 and hiring tens of thousands of representatives to come in and make all these audits. So while we've been kind of shouting this from the rooftop for years, like that's an employee, that's misclassified, that's misclassified, and not in
Mm-hmm.
a shameful way, just in like an educational way.
Mm-hmm.
It's only now that we're starting to see a lot of small business owners who have 1099s that they're filing and very few W-2s getting flagged and getting penalized for misclassification, which can be, and if you don't want to be scared, fast forward 30 seconds, tens of thousands of dollars for even just one person working under you and being misclassified. And
Wow.
that's the federal law. Like, of course, some states are more strict than others, but just to get the spooky stuff out of the way, it is Halloween. So I know this isn't airing on Halloween, but um, but on the other side of it, and where I think HR can be really elegant is, which no one has ever said before. But I took that from a client testimonial. So there you go.
Love.
But there is a way that we can design your offers and really play with the labor margins and the cost of your people and the roles that they're playing, making sure that they're titled correctly and paid fairly with really great benefits, and still making sure that they're more affordable than maybe what you're already doing now, and making sure that your offers, we understand those from top to bottom so that we can staff your business appropriately. So it's really on two sides. One, the classification, and the other is on the actual client work and how that is showing up in your communications with your
Mm.
clients and even all the way back to your sales process.
How do you know when the time has come for it to be a like 1099 versus, let's say, like an actual employee?
Yeah. So the way I like to think about it is a contractor is meant to be easy come, easy go.
Mm.
So they come in, they bring their expertise, they check some tasks off a list, they hand you the thing, and then they go on their way. And then you let them know when you need them again. That's really the purpose of a 1099. And as a contractor myself, and as I'm
Mhm.
sure most of your people listening would relate to, that's what we want. Like, I don't want to be joining into somebody's business and working on their HR and then fitting into their processes and using their systems and building, adapting everything I've done to fit into their business. If they want that, they should hire me as an employee and I'll enmesh myself in their system and, make me an offer. I'm
Mhm.
very expensive, but go ahead. Um, and so there's kind of two different ways to look at contractors. Is one is like very basic task driven stuff, or highly specialized experts where you bend your processes to fit into their mold so that you can
Mm.
take what you get from them, like us, you take your HR strategy and then you go and implement it on your own. Whereas the way that I think that we can get a little messy here is that different states have different laws for contractors.
Mm.
So if you are working with someone that is on a retainer, then we probably want to take a really solid look at what exactly that role is doing within your business. We have worked with businesses. Most of them are going to be a few really core employees that are going to be really focusing on day-to-day communication, client delivery, leadership, and management. That's always something you bring internal. That's not something that you can really do externally. But then in some states, it's going to be a little stricter than others. California basically makes you prove that your person should be a 1099 and not an employee. And almost no one, even day of assistants, are allowed to be classified as a contractor.
Wow.
So something to consider there. I know this sounds really annoying, but think about it as we've all maybe gone through some abusive or corporate trauma situations. And these laws are actually in place to really create welcoming, warm, safe, and consistent work environments for employees that need a good job, need a way to provide for their family. So while it can be really annoying for small business owners, being able to provide that type of job can be some of the best impact you ever make in your business. And it's all of our clients are so proud of what they built, even if they avoided it for 5 years. So
Mhm.
it's really fun. There's a way to kind of piecemeal it together. And then at a certain point, especially if you have big growth for your business, then getting ahead of that a little bit sooner is probably going to save you a lot of money in the long run, not just on like getting in trouble and penalties, but also because employees tend to be a lot more affordable than contractors in the long run. And
Interesting.
they can take a little bit more of a deeper approach to the work that they're doing because you have the control over what they're doing. So it really creates a situation where people can grow with you, which pays off tenfold in the long run.
Is this for like, I'm like, wow, I know nothing about this. I'm like, this is one of those podcast episodes where I'm like, these are my questions, not even questions for my audience. I'm like, I have no idea. Does that like apply for like part-time employees? Like, I'm just picturing, so like for context, I have two girls who work for me on a contracting basis. And neither of them are even close to full-time. How does that apply with, because when I think of like employees, I'm always thinking like the benefits. If my girls were working over 40 hours a week for me, to me that's an absolute no-brainer, they would be employees. How does that work? How does like HR and the way that you do employees versus contractors apply to part-time people, or like people that only are working, a handful of hours a week?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one that we get a lot. People think that having employees means that you are having a full time person, when
Mm-hmm.
really classification has nothing to do with the time that they work. It is
Mm-hmm.
actually about the nature of their work. So, the federal law, which is the most flexible of all the laws, so every single one of us that lives in the US has to follow this law, says that a person can't be working within the confines of your business as a 1099 employee or a 1099 contractor. Sorry about that, if they are producing product that is basically the purpose of the business. So we
Mm-hmm.
have a contractor, I'm sorry, we have a copywriting agency as an example, and she's looking to hire another copywriter in order to, expand her bandwidth, take on more clients, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty self-explanatory.
Mm-hmm.
Under no circumstances in any state would she be allowed to hire a copywriter that delivers on the work that her company is promising as a contractor. That person has to be an employee. Same with like graphic design agencies. If you hire a graphic designer to subcontract on some of that work, it can't be graphic design work. It has to be something that's totally out of the realm of what your business provides and advertises itself for. So I think that's one thing that really catches people off guard, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, wait a second, I thought the way to scale and expand my business was to get subcontractors and pay them less than what I'm charging or whatever the case
Mm-hmm.
may be. But the good news is that employees will cost you a little bit more on the tax side,
Mm-hmm.
but contractors set their own rates. We get to decide what we can afford when we're hiring employees because we're in control of that. So we set the budget and then we put out an ad and we find somebody that fits within that budget. So it's completely possible that it's actually expected that it's not going to be more
Mm.
expensive for you to hire an employee because you actually get to decide how much you can afford. Whereas with contractors, we
Oh,
can't.
so true. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And the second thing with that, just because I just touched on it, is just the financial aspect is one of the other qualifiers in the federal law. So again, that's the most like loosey goosey law. State
Mm-hmm.
laws are even more strict on this.
Mm-hmm.
But in that case, we have financial control or who's deciding the rates. If there's ever a circumstance where you're making an offer to pay someone a certain amount of money, then they are an employee. They're classified as an employee.
Mm-hmm.
And if the IRS does audit you for whatever the reason is that you popped up on their radar, they're not going to ask you like, why'd you do this? They're going to be like, here's your bill. You owe back taxes. You owe penalties for not treating them correctly. It can mess up your reputation. And I don't want to scare anyone because this is all part of the process of growing a business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you can get really far with contractors. Just make sure that you are covering your bases and it's a mutually beneficial decision in writing that meets all of these standards. And then
Mm-hmm.
when it's time to have an employee, don't be scared, embrace it. That's a great moment. It's going to be fun. Let's do it. It doesn't even have to be as expensive as you think it does. We're kind of expensive, but like, you only have to use us once and then you're set
Yep.
for 20 employees.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Oh my God. I'm like, I'll be in touch. I'm like, it's me. I'm the new client. Oh my God. Well, this is all like so helpful. Can you tell us like I'm an actionable step girly always. So like if someone is listening to this and they're either like they have a contractor or two again, or they're like looking to bring on someone, what are like some actionable steps you can give them or like things to be aware of as they do that process to make sure that they're like compliant, they're doing it ethically, all of that good stuff, like a checklist, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, so it's hard to say. It really is. And I think that that's because there is so much nuance, but it's a good thing because that nuance really lets us be creative and approach it in the way that works best for us.
Mhm.
So what I would say first and foremost is to think about your future goals for the business. And then instead of thinking about what you want, so try to get rid of the bias of employees are scary, they don't need to be full time, like whatever. Instead of thinking about it like that, think about what does my business actually need and then build the role from there. If that still fits into that contractor classification, great. Make sure the contractor has an LLC fee. Make sure that they're giving you a scope of work in their own contract.
Mm,
If you have a contract that you use as well, that's a great start. It's going to protect you. But ideally, you'd want them to be the one that's giving you the terms. That's what the
mm,
IRS is looking for, them to have the control, you to be a customer or a client of them.
mm,
So you can make some of those small changes, especially if you are like me and you have really close relationships with contractors that you use on a regular basis, things like that. Like you can really collaborate in this way. And also just make sure that it's always top of mind that you're going to take it seriously when it is time to hire that next person. Because if you, for example, find like one of my favorite things to do is find like the most talented people and then somehow trick them to being on my team. So that's how I got our content manager. She's our conversion copywriter that I worked with for years and years. She had a baby. There seemed to be this little opening where she didn't want to have her business anymore. And I was like, bam, I got to have
You're
her.
like, this is for me.
So, and I just know that role makes such an impact for me. And it can really span like weeks over weeks, days over days, like having them be a part of it, having them drive our messaging, helping me not sound like a scary psycho whenever we put out anything on social
Mhm,
media, because everything I've said here has probably scared everyone. They've stopped listening. Please come back. But realistically, like you can have a collaborative relationship with your contractors, but
mm,
don't bend too much. You will grow out of your contractors, and that's
mhm,
okay. So just be ready and embrace it when the time comes. Have open communication. It's most of our contractors are totally fine with you growing out of them. Just make sure you're communicating that with them in a way. Most of our contractors want to serve us in the best way that they can.
mhm,
And your business should grow out of contractors, and just don't let that fear of that transition hold back your business from growth. One of the first things we see is when we break down these profit margins is businesses are not only just doubling or tripling their revenue over the first year of having their team culture set up with just one or two employees, but they're also saving money on outsourced labor. They're also having better relationships with the contractors that they used for a long time,
mhm.
especially if they chose to move over to employee status. And they've raised their prices because the service
Amazing.
they're providing is so much deeper because it's all within the confines of the overall business's message. And
Mhm.
we've got to be able to allow for some labor cost in there. So being strategic about that means you have to raise your prices. So you might as well just do that now and then fill out our contact form.
Love that. I'm like ditto to that always. I'm like the way I'm like no one is ever charging as much as they should. I fully believe that. I'm like everyone
Yeah.
can always raise their prices.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, Kira, thank you so much. This was all so insightful, so helpful. We'll obviously link everything in the show notes, but can you tell everyone where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram's always the most fun. And I know that this can be a really scary topic. But that's also why we offer free consults. And I do all of the free consults. I just love to get in on the ground and like really talk to people about their businesses and figure out how we can create things that are going to be adaptable to them. So definitely let me know if there's ever any questions that pop up or if you have certain situations that are coming up. And of course, our one-on-one services is definitely for people that are hiring their first employee and they know it, or converting a team of contractors to employees. But we also have a really kick-ass membership,
Mm,
and it's such a great community. It's a lot of our big-time business owners that like you would know their names, that they're one of their main jobs now is running their team. So it's a really fun kind of like mastermindy vibe because everybody's focused on making sure they're compliant and their team's running, but it's a lot of discussion about leadership and motivation
mm,
and things like that. But also like, am I allowed to pay them this much? That kind of
mhm.
thing. So
Yes.
that's a great place to start if you're not sure if you're ready yet to just be around that type of environment and to be around other business owners that have done it. It's been super encouraging. I pretty much made that membership for myself. So you can
Love
always
that.
join us there.
Oh, I'm obsessed. Well, thank you so much again for coming on and sharing all of your wisdom. I'm like so excited for everyone to listen to this because this was so helpful for me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. I'm here to educate. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, this was incredible. So thank you. And thank you guys so much for listening. And we will see you next time.